I'm happy to have Nekima Levy Armstrong, who is with the Black Lives Movement out of the Twin Cities. And as we talk about some of the racial divide that has really escalated so much since the death of George Floyd, Nekima, I wanted to talk with you about so much of the narrative that is out there, whether it's in the media, on social media, and what people are saying about your movement. What is it that you don't think people really understand?
Well, I think that the first thing that people need to understand is that we wholeheartedly believe that Black Lives Matter. They should believe that Black Lives Matter. And they should be willing to stand out on the front lines with the rest of us, demanding justice for Black lives. Although our movement focuses very heavily on police killings of Black people, we are also looking overall at the quality of life that African Americans experience in the United States, including a lack of economic justice, which needs to be addressed, political disenfranchisement, which impacts our community, and the fact that too often we are being sent the message that we are still second and third class citizens in a country in which our ancestors helped to build.
For those who say that the people who are being arrested, no matter what color, it is because of the crimes that are committed. So doesn't it make sense, no matter what your skin color is, that you would be arrested for committing a crime? So your response to that then, because I hear what you're saying, you feel that the Black community is more targeted.
Absolutely, the Black community is more targeted. I mean, we have been since the origins of the criminal justice system, specifically when you look at the Black codes that were placed on the books primarily in southern states, although plenty of northern states also still have Black codes on their books, where the laws were changed after slavery was supposedly abolished in this country to make standard behavior by Black people a crime. So Black people hanging out late at night, being unemployed, spitting on the sidewalk, talking too loud, all of those things became crimes. And it empowered Southern white sheriffs to be able to come into the Black community and bring people into the justice system. One of the things that people need to understand is that the state was able to profit off of the labor of Black people who were being rounded up by law enforcement, and companies, including railroad companies, mining companies, and other large companies were able to profit off of the backs of the labor of those who were incarcerated, newly freed slaves.
I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about politics, the divide in this country, and specifically if you believe that there has been some justice with the 4 officers who have been involved or charged with the death of George Floyd. Let me take a quick break and we'll come back. I'm continuing my conversation with Nekima Levy Armstrong, who is with Black Lives Matters out of the Twin Cities. And as we talk about, Nekima, why Black Lives Matters started and where it has come, I want to talk about the politics in this country, the divide that has happened, and where BLM fits in with this.
So the one thing I want people to be aware of is that I'm not only speaking from the perspective as an activist who's out on the front lines, I'm also a civil rights attorney. And so I understand that this current fight that is being fought by folks who are on the front lines for Black Lives Matter and many other organizations and our allies is a perpetuation of the fight that started in the 50s and 60s during the civil rights era, where you had African Americans and allies standing on the front lines demanding an end to Jim Crow laws and segregation and denial of economic opportunity for Black folks. And as a result of all those protests and demonstrations, we saw the Civil Rights Act of 1964 be passed. We saw the Housing Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, et cetera, all be passed in response to Black people highlighting the significant differences in the ways that we're being treated in this country because of the color of our skin. Now, in a similar way, Black Lives Matter is highlighting the significant differences in terms of the way that we are being treated because of the color of our skin. Law enforcement is an extension of our government. It cannot be separated from what happens within our system of government, our political power structure, the economics behind law enforcement and how our government functions, who gets resources and who doesn't, who has laws enforced against them and who doesn't. And so we have to realize that as we are standing against the unfettered power of law enforcement, that we are also standing against a government that has failed to put in place the proper checks and balances and levels of accountability to protect its most vulnerable citizens.
Along those lines, do you believe that there has been some justice from the death of George Floyd with the arrests, then the charges, and this looks like these 4 officers involved, this is going to go to trial?
Well, let's be clear. Part of the progress, if that's what people want to call it, that has been made in George Floyd's case has been as a result of people going out and protesting in the streets for many years and continuing to demand justice. We demanded that the 4 officers involved in killing George Floyd be charged and arrested, that they be fired as well. And that is a first and an important step. It should be a no-brainer in this process. But we are still a long ways away from actually having a semblance of justice because those officers still have to stand trial. They will likely be tried by an all-white jury or close to an all-white jury. And there is still a possibility that they will not be convicted for killing George Floyd, even though we all witnessed his brutal murder on videotape. Yeah. And so again, there hasn't been justice. There have been some steps on the way towards justice. But the other reality is that none of the things that have happened will bring back George Floyd.
Yes.
His children will never be able to see him again.
Yes.
His family will never be able to hug him again. That's important for folks to realize. And as we're out here fighting these battles, it's so that there's not more George Floyds that we have to watch be killed on videotape.
Let me ask you this. Protests versus riots. Where does Black Lives Matter stand with the protests that started peacefully with a great movement and a great message, then turning into those riots? Do you see that as helping the cause because it gained so much attention, or is that something that Black Lives Matter is against?
Well, Black Lives Matter's protests have always been peaceful, right? We can't control how a protest turns, once you establish that we're going to show up this day, this time, we're going to rally, we're going to march, we're going to have speakers. All of those things are within our First Amendment rights of freedom of speech. We do not condone violence happening at protests, but we also know that there are anarchists, there are agitators, there are some folks connected to the government who show up and who play a role in protests taking a different turn. I think that those who want to see our cause for justice will see our cause for justice. Those who want to make excuses about why we shouldn't be in the streets protesting are going to make excuses. Nothing that happens during or after a protest invalidates the call for justice, which is necessary to protect lives in this country.
Yes.
So if we know that police violence is likely going to lead to these uprisings, is likely going to lead to buildings burning, to potential looting that happens, and this has been a pattern for over 70 years, at some point, those who are in power need to make a decision about changing the root causes of why people are out in the streets in the first place, why they're upset in the first place.
A civil rights attorney and speaking on behalf of Black Lives Matter out of the Twin Cities. I appreciate your time very much and the conversation, Nekima. Thank you.